that, we can move on to the final item on your agenda today, number 17, case number 2022-012051 CUA for the property at 79 28th Street, a conditional use authorization.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Tola Toibi, Department staff. The item before you is a request for conditional use authorization to construct a 3-story rear and horizontal addition to an existing 3-story single-family dwelling with an unauthorized unit at the ground floor. The subject property is located on the south side of 28th Street and Guerrero Street and Dolores Street within an RH2 zoning district, the Central Neighborhoods Large Residence Special Use District, and a 40X height and bulk district. The expansion will accommodate 2 dwelling units, including an existing legal unit and 1 net new legal unit. The primary unit will exceed 3,000 gross square feet, thereby requiring a conditional use authorization pursuant to Planning Code 249.92. The project site was originally developed as a single-family dwelling in 1907 and presently contains the 3-story single-family dwelling with 1 unauthorized unit. There's also 1 off-street parking space at the ground story. The rear addition is proposed at all 3 stories with varying widths and depths at each level. As a result, the existing 1878 square foot primary unit at the upper floors will expand about 1473 square feet, resulting in a gross floor area of 3,351 square feet. Additionally, the 700 square foot unauthorized dwelling unit at the ground story will be legalized and expanded approximately 795 square feet, resulting in a gross floor area of 1,495 square feet. Included in this total increase in gross floor area per unit is the expansion of the existing 340 square foot 1-car garage to a 620 square foot 2-car garage, which is shared between units. Within the existing structure and the expanded area, the project proposes a full interior remodel, which will convert the primary unit from a 2-bedroom, 2-bath to a 3-bedroom, 3.5-bath, with expanded living and dining spaces. The unauthorized unit at the ground story will be legalized and upgraded from a 0-bedroom, 1-bath to a 1-bedroom, 1.5-bath, providing enhanced exposure and direct access to the code-complying rear yard. Shared amenities between the 2 units include 2 Class 1 bicycle parking spaces and 2 off-street parking spaces at the ground floor. Finally, the project proposes to remodel the building's front and rear facades. Prior to the submittal of the project application, the project sponsor conducted and completed a pre-application meeting on October 17, 2022. Several members of the public attended the meeting and expressed concerns regarding light and privacy, noise transmission, and stormwater management. Since the initial pre-application meeting, the sponsors have conducted additional outreach via email and individual meetings with neighbors and neighborhood organizations. The project sponsors held a meeting with adjacent neighbors, conducted a meeting in the community in June 2023, where neighborhood organizations were invited, and also held a meeting with former tenants of the property in August 2023. To date, the department has received correspondence from 10 people regarding the proposed project, 1 correspondence requesting additional information, 2 in support of the project, and 7 correspondence in opposition of the project. Opposing members of the public expressed interest in increasing staff awareness about a previous Ellis Act enacted by the former owner in 2019, and increased staff awareness about the presence of the unauthorized dwelling unit. Additionally, these correspondents disagreed with staff regarding the project's demolition calculations and the fact that it does not constitute a demolition per Planning Code 317. Lastly, opposing members of the public expressed concerns about replacing 2 affordable units with 2 higher-end units, citing the project size as a main concern. On balance, staff finds that the project complies with applicable requirements of the Planning Code, meets the residential design guidelines, and is consistent with the objectives and policies of the general plan. The department recommends approval with conditions for the following reasons. The project maximizes the permitted density on the lot by legalizing the unauthorized unit. The project complies with all the requirements of the Central Neighborhoods Large Residence Special Use District, including the retention of rent-controlled units and the proportion of unit size. The project enhances and preserves the immediate neighborhood's character and scale, and the project provides a use that is compatible with the RH2 zoning district, density and height, resulting in a project that's necessary, desirable, and compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. This concludes staff presentations, and I will pass it to the project sponsor, who will continue with a brief presentation. Thank you.
Project sponsor, you have 5 minutes.
The mouse is not working. I ask for overhead. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maryam Nassajian, representing Aura Arc, and I want to explain a little about 7928 Street Project. So the property was purchased on April 2022 with an approved permit. The approved permit mentioned the property as a single-family unit with 3,017 square feet of residential gross floor area. There was an Ellis Act on the project invoked with the previous owner, which was done January of 2019. Being a first-time homeowner, Maryam and Nabeel, the homeowners, did not know much about the complexities around an Ellis Act, and also the previous owner did not disclose the complexities around the history of the project. This is the previous approved permit that they purchased the property with. It shows that the building only has 1 unit with 3,717 square feet gross floor area. The project owners initially intended to remodel the project and immediately move in, and they were planning to do just some over-the-counter revisions, like including a deck, and do the construction and move in. But after evaluating the project and realizing that they're gonna be more than 10 feet above the grade, we realized that they had to go through this 311, and it will take so much time. So that's when they considered this house as their permanent house, and they considered their future needs for their growing family and their aging parents who ultimately are going to move with them. So they decided to expand the project and build 2 units. Through this process, they just realized that there is actually an illegal unit in this house. So it is not 1 unit with 3,1717 square feet, but 2 units with that this square footage splits between them. So they're just understanding, the implications of Ellis Act and an illegal unit. We came to planning department multiple times to ensure that this project is possible, and we took all proactive actions like staying in the demolition calculation threshold to not lose that 1 unit rent controlled unit, and also just knowing that Ellis Act has a lot of complexities. So we were very careful, and we were in frequent communication with the planning department. This is after understanding about the illegal unit, they decided to legalize the existing unit and expand it and improve it, and this is what it has turned to. So their vision is they like Noe Valley. They have found a school that they like for their son, and they chose that neighborhood as their permanent house, and they are planning to make the primary unit as their permanent house, and eventually when the aging parents join them, they will be in the second unit. Just because of the complexities of the Ellis Act, Nabeel has reached out to the previous tenant multiple times, offering the lower unit with a rent controlled rate in case it goes out to the market for rent until the parents move in. But we have not heard back from him. He offered to talk to his lawyer and get back to us, but we didn't hear back. We try to keep full transparency throughout this process. We have had 2 official pre-application meetings. We have met with the adjacent neighbors, heard their concerns, took action to satisfy them. Nabeel and Maryam have individually met with all the neighbors in Venice City, explained the project, and the neighbors are actually in support of the project because this lot has been vacant for so many years, and it has a really not likable history, and they want a new development there. So he has gotten 29 letters of support from the neighbors. We have had ongoing communication with the evicted neighbor. This is the project timeline that shows all the efforts and the dates.
Thank you, ma'am, but that is your time. The commissioners may have some follow-up questions for you.
Okay.
With that, we should open up public comment. Members of the public, this is your opportunity to address the commission on this matter. If you're in the chambers, please come forward. If you're calling in remotely, you need to press *3 or raise your hand via WebEx.
I can talk. Thank you. How much time do we get?
3 minutes.
Oh, great. I prepared 2 versions. That's fine. Good evening, Georgia Shudish. There are many issues with this project due to the Ellis Act eviction and the many years it's been vacant. The ultimate outcome of the occupancy and the tenure of the main unit and the legalized UDU needs a full deliberation, as I wrote in my September 3rd email. But that's in the Commission's hands. There are 2 alteration permits issued to the LLC in 2020 and 2021 sold with the project. There was a contingent sale in October 2021 that must have fallen through, and the ultimate sale with the 2 permits by the LLC to the current project sponsor in April 2022 for $2.2 million. The scope of the current plans are similar to the original 2016 plans from the LLC that were withdrawn. On August 29th, I sent interior photos of 79 28th Street from the web ad when sold in 2016 to the LLC. I think it is important to get a sense of the lives that were lived there and were disrupted by the eviction in 2019 for a speculative project. I think the commodification of this house, home to long-term tenants, could have possibly, perhaps, maybe, been forestalled if the never-adjusted demo calcs had been adjusted even once, never mind twice since 2009. And that is the fundamental issue today, at least for me. There was a speculative frenzy in past years. I was here fairly regularly talking about the issue of extreme alterations that were really demolitions and the huge price increases with creation of mega mansions using the loophole of the never-adjusted demo calcs. In response, in 2017, the RET was created, followed by the Peskin legislation. Both failed. The demo calcs were recently in the news, somewhat obliquely, with the mention of 125 Crown Terrace. In the past, I have mentioned Joe Ashkenazi's 2012 article, which has quotes from developers crowing about the demo calc loophole. For this 28th Street project, there should be a warning letter if the calcs are exceeded during the work. It should return to the Commission as a CUA, not just allowed to get revision permits from DBI. Both Shakespeare and Faulkner famously wrote about the past. The past is why we're here today. The calcs for this project are very close to the tantamount to demolition thresholds, and this project is another example of why the Commission should adjust the calcs as empowered to do by Section 317B2D. And here's what I just said for all of you. Thank you very much. And I don't have a problem with these people. I just want to say that parenthetically. My issue is not with them. My issue is with the whole history, as I said, the past, and that's what I think you have to reckon with today, as well as all the LSAT considerations. But that's your bailiwick, not mine. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Sandra Dratler. I'm here today representing Faith in Action at St. James Episcopal Church. In reviewing the staff documents for this project, I was struck by the absence of anything resembling an analysis of how this project measures up to your recently adopted Racial and Social Equity Action Plan. Given the importance you placed on the action plan's development, should there not be something that takes into consideration the fact that this property came to be because an elderly couple was wrongly evicted under the Ellis Act? Their low-income housing unit has disappeared. A family unit is proposed. In essence, the house will be a single-family home. A unit of affordable housing has been removed from our greatly lacking city inventory. This backdoor way of creating single-family mega homes where formerly 2 affordable units existed seems to be a pattern around the city. In my own neighborhood, the Richmond, I see real estate listings for single-family homes that have been approved to include an ADU with a commitment to provide it as an affordable unit by the developer. The home is then sold, and the buyer may have no knowledge, such as our people here, the applicants here today, of the commitments made, and no penalty is found. There's not follow-up. I see that here. The property was passed from developer to developer, and along the way, the Ellis Act commitments have been erased. The way I see it, the evicted family has first dibs over the parents, and I'm glad to hear that you've been trying to get in touch with them. Remember that housing is a right and a matter of social justice.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Ozzie with San Francisco Land Use Coalition. I personally have been involved with this project since 2018, and because of the elderly Mexican-American long-term tenants, 30-plus years, I mean, think about it, 30-plus years. Some of you probably have parents at that age, and I just want to put up the picture of them. Overhead, please. So you would not think that I'm talking about imaginary people. These folks were Ellis Acted eventually by the developer who was, for the lack of a better definition, he was a total schmuck. And to clarify what Ms. Schudish mentioned about the withdrawal of the permit, he did withdraw his planning permit, but he did go to the DBI and pulled an over-the-counter permit for just the remodel. And that's where Mr. Samad comes to picture when he actually bought the house with the permit. It was not a planning permit, it was an over-the-counter permit. And as usual, the schmuck developer had lied to DBI with no consequence, presenting it as a single-family home. So there was never a plan to merge units. This thing never came to the purview of the planning. I want to repeat the same thing as other speakers talk about, in particular Ms. Rattler. If we do have any focus on racial and social equity, this is a perfect project, to actually exemplify that. Where is the racial and social equity if we're going to have long-term elderly tenants, unlimited income, being kicked out so we could replace it with, luxurious, spacious condos that are going to be sold at a profit? And I appreciate the fact that the current owner has reached out to Connie and Michael Juarez and offering them the unit below, but on a temporary basis until the parents move in. I don't think we want Connie and Michael to get Ellis acted again. So that offer to me, is not much of an offer. So I'm here to urge you to reject this project, because if racial and social equity matters, and if it's a new focus per your new housing element, this project does not fit the bill and does not stand. So I still have 25 seconds, Mr. Ayonin. That's the important thing here, that this is a travesty. This is not the pattern that we want to continue on. If these people were just some young yuppies, that they could move on somewhere else, I would not have so passionately defended them and have spent 5 years, talking about the same folks and trying to save them from eviction. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other members of the public in the chambers that wish to submit their testimony, let's go to our remote callers.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Anastasia, a District 8 tenant and San Francisco Tenant Union member. I'm coming at this from a different slant. Aside from all the things that have been said, on March 1st, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors unanimously voted for an ordinance introduced by my District 8 Supervisor, Raphael Mandelman, to combat ongoing trends of large, luxurious, single-family monster homes replacing smaller, older homes that are more affordable to middle-income residents. Mandelman said in a statement, "We've done a really good job of building housing for millionaires and billionaires over the last decades, when we should be building housing for the middle class." Commissioners, you're reminded of this phenomenon every week. The ordinance to curb the construction of luxury monster homes in District 8 created a new central Neighborhoods Large Residential Special Use District for Glen Park, Noe Valley, Dolores Heights, Mission Dolores, Diamond Heights, Twin Peaks, and Eureka Valley, subjecting new construction and residential expansion projects within those neighborhoods to new requirements, including a conditional use approval from the Planning Commission for residential units that are over 3,000 gross square feet. The upper unit at 79 28th Street exceeds 3,000 square feet, and that is why you are having this CU hearing. It's a stretch to say that the project complies with the 8 priority planning policies in Planning Code Section 101.1b that maintains that the city's supply of affordable housing be preserved and enhanced. The Tenants Union rejects planning's claim that this project promotes housing affordability by increasing housing supply. The project cannot hide the fact that it doesn't add any new units. This project replaces 2 rent-controlled, modest units with 2 luxury units affordable to a very few. Aside from the property owner's unprincipled behavior, the Tenants Union opposes this project and urges you to vote no. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. This is Roisin Eisner, Director of Activism and Operations at the San Francisco Tenants Union. I think it's quite clear that this case should not move forward. If we approve it today, we're essentially saying that our laws don't matter. This kind of bad behavior shouldn't be rewarded by allowing the construction of already restricted monster homes that are not functionally, multi-unit housing. This is an incentivization of exactly the kind of fraud, misuse of laws like the Ellis Act, and displacement causing crisis conditions in San Francisco. I also think it's worth considering the address on Clipper Street that the owners also have, and I have some real doubts about the narrative being presented today. Who amongst us doesn't have aging parents? I commute clear across town, my kids to school. I sympathize with that. And even though all of that is true and not potentially a speculative narrative, I wouldn't expect to have the right to build a restricted home after, a history of fraud and displacement and misuse of laws. I don't know why we would make an exception in this case when we should be doing the opposite. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, last call for public comment. If you're in the chambers, please come forward. If you're calling in remotely, you need to press *3 or raise your hand via WebEx. Seeing no request to speak, Commissioners, public comment is closed, and this matter is now before you.
Just want to thank staff. Thank you for the project sponsors and all those who called in or who were here in person to give testimony. I think it's a somewhat complicated case, but also a simple case at the same time, and unfortunately one we've experienced quite a bit of. I feel like the last year or so of, someone purchasing a home, there was some poor behavior before that it was purchased, and then now what do we do as a commission with the challenges, right, of it? As far as the building itself and the project, we can kind of look at that aspect first. Certainly, it's enlarging the home beyond the scope of, requiring the CU is part of why it's here because of the size of the home. It's not very much over the amount of space that would kick it into CU territory in terms of the primary unit becoming 3,351 square feet and this additional 1,000 square feet. And then having the second unit become, I think, a very livable unit, something that often we struggle to see, quite frankly, is the second units not being just tiny kind of studios that are shoved into the back, a lower part of a unit. So from a design standpoint and reviewing the plans, I think the plans for the home are appropriate and they seem to be well thought out. They seem to be in context with the neighboring buildings in terms of the heights and kind of how they match up with the other buildings on the block. So from just the building itself, I don't have an issue approving the project. I think where it gets more complicated is thinking about not so much the use, which is, to my case, having it be a two-family dwelling, but the users and all the history that's related to this project. How do we handle it? I think part of what we're asked to do is to try to have a deterring effect on future bad behavior by not approving this project. And that's why I went into, if we were to not approve this project, what are we left with? It's still a building that has 2 units, one which was illegal, and so whoever would to purchase or to renovate this building would still need to come to us or maybe not come to us, but go through a process to legalize the second dwelling unit or come to us to remove it, and we'd have to be faced with that conversation. So we could certainly shape the building if we thought it should be smaller, the second unit should be smaller to have it be more affordable or things like that, but either way, they're coming to planning either through this body or through over-the-counter and kind of ministerial work to do something with this building to have it be legally occupied, and certainly 4 years being vacant, certainly to renovate it and to make it habitable again. One thing I think I was welcome to hear, but I agree with Ms. Rome that offering the unit to the couple that was evicted for an unknown temporary time period is certainly a great effort, but I can certainly see why they may or not be interested in it. It did make me wonder, Director Hillis and Ms. Waddy, around again, kind of our connection to our tenant programs and things like that. I don't know if there is a right of first refusal in this case where other laws that are, maybe this is for you, Ms. Connor, in terms of state laws where when people are evicted and renovations occur, they have a right to return. Obviously, they were evicted under the Ellis Act and not under a renovation, but I'm just wondering certainly project sponsors reaching out. Do we have any verification that that happened? Or is there a way that we can do something so we know what the conversation was, or if there are even any laws that apply to, what is supposed to happen in that relationship in a case like this? I'm not sure who wants to take that, but it's kind of a complicated one.
Kate Connor, Planning Department staff. So I can speak a little bit to the Ellis Act eviction. So there was an Ellis Act eviction back in 2019, and so there's basically 3 different constraint periods when you're looking at an Ellis Act eviction. There's 2 years where none of the units can be re-rented, and when you're subjecting something or going through an Ellis Act eviction, you're removing it from the rental market. So those first 2 years, it cannot be re-rented. Then there is a 5-year period where not only is there a right of first refusal, but the unit needs to be offered at the same rent that it was rented before. And then there's a 10-year period, and that is just the right of first refusal to the previous tenant. And so that is in place for all those units. I think the thing to really kind of dig into a little bit with the Ellis Act is those re-rental restrictions only apply to the unit that the tenant was residing in. And there is an exemption if it's going to be owner-occupied. So the previous tenants were previously occupying 79, and so that's where the new owners are going to come in and have that be owner-occupied. Although 79A is the smaller unit, there is no legal requirement that it be offered, by law to the previous tenants. The only kind of re-rental restrictions on 79A would be the 2 years not re-renting it.
Of the unit, that's the primary unit?
Of both.
Both. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Both units would have the 2-year restriction. So let me just repeat back. There are some restrictions, but unfortunately, they would not apply to the previously evicted tenants because they would be being offered the second unit that's now being legalized, which is not a legal unit prior to
Correct.
that.
Yeah, and this is something that we did kind of check in with the rent board to kind of make sure that we really understood all of the re-rental restrictions.
So it's really at the discretion of the property owner to offer the second unit for re-rental to the evicted tenants.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know, Director Ms. Wadi, if I had anything to add, but thank you, Ms. Connor. So that just always leads us back to what do we do and what are the impacts of our decisions? And so I don't know, perhaps I can be persuaded, if we were to not approve this project or to ask staff to change it and come back and work with the project sponsor. I'm certainly open to what folks would want to have it changed to, but I don't know that we would get a different outcome than 2 units in this building and the couple still having been evicted. I don't know that I'm not seeing a pathway for us to require anything unless folks are just interested in the building and the units being smaller so that they are more affordable by design. But again, and partly in that way, whether it's owner occupied or not to me is irrelevant because the building will be there long after these owners and they could decide in the next 2 years that they don't want to live here or who knows what. And so to me, it's not about the current users. It's about, what do we want this building to be like and how do we want it to perform in the future. With that, I'll call on Commissioner Ruiz.
I just have a clarifying question. So, Mrs. Connor, what you explained, because we saw the correspondence between the current owner and the tenants who were LS acted of offering them the unit of right of first refusal. But what you're saying is this information that was found out following that correspondence, and so the owner, and I stepped out during the presentation, I'm sorry, so the owner is currently not willing to offer the unit that could potentially be rented?
I think that the letter that, and I can definitely have the planner also clarify, but the letter that was submitted by the sponsor to the previous tenants is something that's completely voluntary. So there isn't an actual legal requirement for them to do so because the Ellis Act is really, it has to match the tenant to the specific unit. And since they did not reside in 79A and 79 is going to be owner occupied, there just isn't that legal requirement. So I think the letter might be a little bit confusing. There isn't actually that requirement under the Ellis Act.
Okay, so we can just disregard that correspondence then. I'll pass it off to someone else while I formulate my thoughts.
Comments, questions, motions? Commissioner Moore.
There is an aspect that was concerning to me. The applicant apparently is or has been completely unaware or unfamiliar with all the subtleties of regulation that govern approvals and alterations to buildings here in San Francisco. Is the applicant here?
Right there.
Is the applicant willing to speak briefly about what happened. There is obviously a required real estate disclosure that during the sale, that should have been part of the required documentation. And again, there is a huge loophole, particularly when you deal with somebody who is not familiar with any of this stuff. Could you briefly speak to that step when you came to this country or to the city or whatever it is, and what happened to you during that time?
Sure. President Danner and commissioners, first of all, we'd like to extend our heartfelt gratitude for providing us this platform and to share our story. We're immigrants who came to SF around 10 years ago, drawn to its promise of opportunity and its
Sir,
rich
could you just
history.
speak a little closer to the microphone? Thank
Sure.
you.
So over these 10 years, San Francisco hasn't just been our home. It hasn't just a place where we've lived. It's become our home, a place where we got married, where we welcomed our first child, and where we aspire to establish our permanent roots. So about the history of how we bought the 79 28th Street. We bought it at the height of the pandemic bubble. This was the only house so before this we owned a condo, so we've never owned a single family in the city, house in the city. So we really wasn't really aware of like rental laws or the intricacies of the Ellis Act when we bought it. The real estate agent, when we bought it, did mention that this has an Ellis Act designation, which means we can't rent out the primary unit. But given that, as we just saw, it came with approved permits from the previous owner, the remodel as a single-family home, at that point, that really didn't seem concerning to us because we were planning on living in it ourselves. And it's much to our disadvantage that we found out after the fact that, the complexities of the Ellis Act and especially speaking to the previous owner who did the eviction, we, after the fact, of course, like this has been a steep learning curve for us that we found, the individual in person has been, done other unsavory, has evicted other tenants. So it's kind of like, unfortunately, we did look at legal recourse, but at this point in time, it was just not a path we'd wanted to take because I think the individual is just adept at, dodging lawsuits. I think there are several pending now at this point, and we've been swept into this controversy. But honestly, we're just looking to create a permanent home for our family as immigrants to this country. So I hope that gives you some clarity on how the evolution of when we bought the property.
Were you aware about this 3,000 square foot rule? We are kind of in a strange position. Your neighbors, other people have expressed the concern that because your unit exceeds the 3,000 square foot threshold, which was established during a very different time for very specific reasons, because we want to avoid oversized units. Were you aware of the difference between what you were proposing or asking for and that limit?
We were aware of the difference, yes, and it didn't occur to us that would be controversial because there are other projects which I think even last month, 35 Valley Street, which is approved as a single-family home at 3,800 square feet, I think, and then 50 28th Street on the same block was, I think both units are around 2,700, so comparable in size. So, and then given that we want to grow our family, we were looking for a certain size of house which suited our needs. That's what ended up being over 3,000. And if we look at the original permit, which the previous owner had, it's like I think 10% over. If we had followed the original plans, we would have lost both the rent control status of both units. It would have been, then deemed a single family home. So when we became aware of all of the history, thanks to, some of the neighbors we worked with, we tried to at least make the best of a difficult situation. Tried to, make sure that we're under the demolition limits, and we preserve rent control for both units, and the lower unit is rentable, down when the time comes.
Thank you for your explanation. I'm curious. Thank you so much. You answered my questions. I would be interested to hear from perhaps Ms. Wadi. What is the Valley Street approval? I have never heard about the Valley Street approval, which is larger than what's supposed to be in that district. And is there indeed inconsistencies of how that 3,000 square foot threshold is being used? I am not prepared to penalize somebody when there's precedent that other buildings are going through which are slightly over 3,000 square feet.
Sure. As it relates to the Valley Street, I'm not off the top of my head familiar with the project. I think this commission has seen a couple, less than a handful, of the Central Neighborhoods Large Home CU triggers. And normally the threshold that we use at a staff level in deciding whether or not to support a project or recommend approval to you has a couple different factors. One, it's looking at the surrounding context. A big part of the policy intent behind that regulation was about neighborhood context and making sure that we weren't taking, small homes often in Noe Valley that were, 1,000 square foot, 1,200 square feet, and making them these mansions that are disproportionate in size to their surrounding context, because we know, block by block, there can be very different sized homes and contexts. So one, we look at what is this specific project proposing relative to its immediate adjacent neighbors and its surrounding block context. So that's very important. Secondly, we look at often what's the delta from the current home. We have seen some projects, I can't remember off the top of my head if they've come to you yet or if they haven't, where the home is already over, but they're doing a really small addition, 100 or 2 square feet, and it seems like just sort of a modest remodel to an existing home that seems reasonable, sort of regardless of the final number. And then oftentimes it's also, what is the density factor at play here? Are they adding an extra unit and trying to, keep or add a nominal amount of square feet relative to what the existing home is, and they're adding a second unit, but they're still doing a couple hundred square feet in addition? Kind of all of those 3 factors are the factors that usually go into our analysis when we're looking at the large home SUD. So I think when it came to this project, we looked at the previous approval size, which was a little over the 3,000 square foot threshold already, and recognizing that, that was their project intent, was to have a home that was just over 3,000 square feet. And the fact that they needed to now factor in a secondary unit, how can they sort of get the size project that they thought they were kind of buying, like a 3,000 or so square foot home, and add an additional unit. And I think when you look at the land use table here, if you were to net out the unconditioned space, it actually brings you, I believe, under the 3,000 square foot threshold. That's not how we calculate gross square floor area, but I think practically speaking, I think that's a relevant consideration as well. So I hope that gives a little color to our analysis.
No, I think it was a great explanation. I really appreciate the thoroughness by which you were saying it. Ultimately, the building has to be in context, and I totally take everything you're saying, but that would help us to be cognizant of the variation in approval. And I am intending to support this project. There is so much wrong which is on the front end, including the pretense taking out of planning overview directly through DBI for a site permit. That is where renovation permit. That is where my anger is, and that is, in addition to the Alice acting, where the injustice of the process lies. So I think I'm not going to take that out against people who are just trying to find their footing in all of this complication being in a foreign country. I'm not going to do that.
I second that sentiment.
I make a motion to approve, I assume it's with conditions, whatever it says here, with conditions, and I'm looking forward what my fellow commissioners have to say.
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Koppel?
Yeah, who is this magic developer who just keeps selling projects illegally?
Good question.
Who? Chris? And so, do we do any checking up on these things? I mean, if
Don't we have a naughty list, I thought,
Like,
that we put people on?
I think we're all just sick of hearing these types of projects sometimes every single week, and it seems like no one's even trying to get to the bottom of this. And so I know it's a bunch of, I don't know how many, but serial bad players who keep doing this, and I got no problem with this project sponsor here, but like, it literally seems like no one's trying to solve these issues at all, and it just keeps happening and keeps happening and keeps happening, and it keeps happening, and we just keep saying, oh, well, there's nothing we could do about it, when I think there's actually something we could do about it. I mean, like, these are all public records, right? I mean, we could look into this stuff and find this stuff out, and we have like specific examples with actual named developers, and wouldn't it be possible to find out how many other properties this guy's been selling, and if these other properties have, PPAs submitted and they're trying to do the same thing, and why do we have to wait till 5 years later and it comes here and everyone just says, oh, we had no idea this was happening?
Sounds like a job for an investigative reporter, or maybe we can hire a private eye at the department to look into it.
I
But
don't think I'm
it's-
asking too much here.
It's not, it's really frustrating, and that it usually is the same small group of bad actors, wreaking havoc on families like this all over the city.
If I can just add one note, at least one of the previous people involved in the last iteration is actively on the, there have at least been a handful of other projects, and their projects are being tracked. So
Okay.
it's not flying under the radar. I think what's important to note is the enhanced compliance control, which is the official
That's the name.
word for the naughty list. It's violations since that date of that ordinance. So we're legally not allowed to look at sort of unscrupulous work that happened prior to that date, but it's moving forward. And so the city, both planning and DBI, are taking very seriously new violations that happen in a systemic way for various folks, and we are watching closely.
Maybe another question to City Attorney Yang, and this may be where it's out of the purview of what we regulate as a city, because it seems like there's been some illegal activity, certainly maybe permits, but also through the real estate transaction process, some not disclosure, which would seem to be a private party. They always decline to do a lawsuit. But does the city have any say over folks doing business against different rules that govern those businesses within the city, like violating rules? I'm just curious, understanding we can't put them on this, enhanced compliance list, but I'm just curious about, other ways the city could approach those who are, doing illegal practices in their realm of business. Granted, it's with a private party, I think, is part of the challenge, right? It's not with the city as we didn't buy the land from them, right?
So, Deputy City Attorney Austin Yang, that's the crux of it, is that these are largely representations between private parties. The City Attorney's Office, we do conduct investigations. We do frequently investigate private companies where we believe that there's a pattern of unlawful conduct. And we do work hand in hand with the departments, both DBI, planning on investigations and enforcement actions. So there are a handful of ways that we can either go after bad actors administratively, or we sometimes will go to court and try to say that a certain company is violating the unfair competition law, and try to seek penalties or attorney's fees from those entities. But it takes some time to work up a case.
Yeah, and it would need to be significant enough. So, anyhow, we have Commissioner Imperial. Your light is on. I know we're not going to get to the bottom of all of it today. Did you want to speak to this project?
Yeah, I just want to add to the applicant to continue. I know you're not required by law, but to continue in good faith, having conversation with the previous tenant. Again, Ellis Act is something that is a big concern in the city. I just would like to show you a good faith in terms of the previous tenants. But there's nothing we can do, unfortunately, as of now. But I'm ready to vote. I think someone seconded already?
Yeah, we did.
Wanted to mention, the housing element, although it's not in our purview, calls out the Ellis Act and attempting to make reform to the Ellis Act. And one kind of idea is a holding period. It may not be the elimination of the Ellis Act, but a holding period where someone who buys property and wants to impose the Ellis Act, there'd be a 5-year holding period before you can actually invoke the Ellis Act and use that to remove tenants. So it's a sensible policy. It's in the housing element. It's obviously got to change state law, so there's a lot from putting it into the housing element to actually changing state law. But it would help, right? You wouldn't have someone buying a property if the Ellis Act was changed and being able to make that eviction.
Ms. Judas, I will talk to you after, but I will not call on you right now. I think we're going to do our vote, and you can tell me your comments later. I'm ready.
Okay, Commissioners, if there's nothing further, there is a motion that has been seconded to approve this matter with conditions. On that motion, Commissioner Braun?
Aye.
Commissioner Ruiz?
Aye.
Commissioner Diamond?
Aye.
Commissioner Imperial?
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
And Commissioner President Tanner?
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 7-0.
We are adjourned.